The silence was a thick shroud, heavier than any winter fog. It clung to the corners of my small, rented room, muffling the distant city hum, amplifying the frantic rhythm of my own pulse. 3 years since the fire. 3 years since I last heard their voices, felt their touch, saw their faces. I designed it. Every beam, every window, every fatal flaw. The perfect family home, I'd called it. A cruel joke. I traced the blueprints spread across my drafting table, not for a new project, but for the ghost of an old one. The lines, once so precise, now blurred into a map of my undoing. My fingers brushed over the spot where the master bedroom had been, where their youngest had slept. A tremor ran through me. It wasn't just the memory of the heat, the smoke, the frantic, futile shouts. It was the crushing weight of knowing I was the architect of their demise. My hands, once creators, now felt like instruments of destruction. I hadn't built anything since, not really. Just sketches, half-formed ideas that dissolved into ash before they ever reached paper. My existence had become a self-imposed penance. A sparse apartment, minimal contact with the world, my days filled with the relentless grind of regret. I ate when I remembered, slept when exhaustion finally claimed me, and woke always to the same cold knot of grief in my gut. The world outside moved on, a vibrant, indifferent blur I observed from behind a pane of frosted glass. I didn't seek solace, I didn't believe I deserved it. Then came the letter. Not a bill, not an advertisement, but heavy cream paper embossed with an unfamiliar seal. It sat on my table for 2 days, an unwelcome intrusion into my carefully curated desolation. Curiosity, a flicker I thought long extinguished, finally compelled me to open it. The lawyer, a man whose tailored suit seemed too bright for my dim apartment, spoke in hushed, formal tones. His words felt distant, like echoes from another room. "Your great-aunt," he began, "passed away last month. Him estate, considerable." He paused, adjusting his spectacles. "He named you, Raj, as the sole heir to the ancestral property." My ancestral home. The words felt alien on my tongue. I knew little of my great-aunt, less of any family beyond the ones I had lost. This house, a place I'd never seen, was a phantom limb I suddenly discovered I possessed. The lawyer described it as a manor, sprawling and ancient, nestled deep in the countryside, miles from any town. "It requires significant upkeep," he added, a slight frown creasing his brow. "And it has been vacant for many years." Vacant, just like me, the irony was a bitter taste. Why me? Why now? The question hung in the air, unanswered by the lawyer's polite, professional demeanor. He merely presented me with a thick sheaf of documents, the keys a heavy, ornate ring that felt impossibly old in my palm, and his card. He left, taking with him the brief, unwelcome burst of light he had brought, leaving me once again in the oppressive quiet. A part of me wanted to refuse to send the keys back, to retreat further into my self-made prison. But another, smaller, more insistent part stirred, a flicker of something that wasn't quite hope, but perhaps a desperate, morbid curiosity. A chance, however slim, to escape the suffocating familiarity of my grief. To trade one form of isolation for another. Perhaps a change of scenery would dull the edges of my torment, or at least offer a new canvas for it. I packed a single bag, mostly necessities, a few worn books, and my old, battered sketchbook. The blueprints stayed, a permanent fixture of my past. The journey was long, the landscape gradually shedding the concrete skin of the city for winding country roads and dense, ancient forests. The air grew cooler, carrying the scent of damp earth and something else, something metallic and faintly acrid, even through the closed windows of my rented car. The GPS signal wavered, then died completely as I turned onto a narrow, overgrown lane. Moss-covered stone walls rose on either side, swallowed by ivy and gnarled tree branches that clawed at the sky. Then through a break in the foliage, I saw it. The ancestral home. Chimneys, tall and crumbling, pierced the bruised sky. A skeletal iron gate, rusted and half off its hinges, guarded the entrance to a driveway choked with weeds. The entire property felt less like a dwelling and more like a mausoleum, a monument to forgotten lives. The house loomed, a silent, formidable presence. It felt heavy, ancient, and deeply, profoundly sad. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of mildew, dust, and something else. Something indefinable, like old paper and dried flowers, but with an underlying current of decay. Cobwebs draped like funeral shrouds from the high ceilings, and the once polished floorboards groaned under my weight. I walked deeper, my footsteps echoing unnaturally loud in the vast emptiness. Each room I entered was a tableau of neglect, shrouded furniture, faded tapestries, portraits with eyes that seemed to follow my every move. The silence was not empty, but pregnant with unseen presences, with the weight of generations. I found the main fuse box in a dusty pantry, and after some trial and error, managed to restore a few dim lights. The heating system, however, remained stubbornly inert. A quick search led me to the basement door, a heavy iron-banded thing tucked away at the back of the kitchen. It creaked open, revealing a precipitous flight of stone steps descending into absolute blackness. I fumbled for my phone, its flashlight beam a weak spear against the encroaching gloom, and began my descent. The steps ended on a dirt floor. Pipes snaked along the walls like metallic vines, dripping water into unseen puddles. At the very heart of this subterranean maze, I found it. The boiler room, no radio contact. The boiler itself was a monstrous contraption of rusted iron, squatting like a sleeping beast. Its gauges were frozen, its valves caked with grime. It pressed in on me, a physical weight. Then from behind the boiler, a soft scraping sound, a rhythmic, deliberate scratching like something trying to get out. What could possibly be making that sound down here in this forgotten place? The lawyer's office had been a sterile, air-conditioned box, a stark contrast to the oppressive humidity that greeted me on the street. Why me? Why now? The question still gnawed, a dull ache behind my ribs as I clutched the heavy ring of keys and the stack of documents. Ancestral home, the lawyer had called it. A legacy. I called it a burden. Another weight to add to the already crushing load of grief and guilt that had become my constant companion since the fire. Raj, the architect who couldn't even save his own home, his own family. The drive was long, a blur of green countryside slowly giving way to overgrown lanes and crumbling stone walls. The GPS, a reluctant guide, finally announced my arrival. Ahead, framed by ancient, gnarled oaks, stood the house. It wasn't just old, it was ancient, its facade a patchwork of weathered stone and peeling stucco like a face etched with 1,000 years of sorrow. Windows, dark and vacant, stared out like blind eyes. A shiver, unrelated to the cooling evening air, traced a path down my spine. This was not solace. This was something else entirely. I parked the rental car, a practical, uninspired sedan, a stark anomaly against the backdrop of decaying grandeur. My few belongings, a duffel bag, a worn backpack, a box of old blueprints, felt insignificant, almost impertinent to be brought into such a place. A cloud of dust motes danced in the sliver of late afternoon sun that pierced the gloom, illuminating a cavernous entryway. The air inside was thick, stagnant, carrying the scent of damp earth, forgotten spices, and something else. Something metallic, almost like old blood, though I immediately dismissed the thought as morbid imagination. My voice, when I tried to speak, felt trapped in my throat. I cleared it, a rasping cough. No response, of course not. What had I expected? A welcoming committee. The house was empty, just like me. I began my reluctant exploration. Each room I entered seemed to stretch into an impossible distance, filled with draped furniture like sleeping giants, their forms distorted and eerie under the white sheets. Dust lay thick on everything, a shroud of neglect. The silence was the most profound thing. It wasn't just an absence of sound, it was an active presence pressing in, listening. I found a relatively clear space in what looked like a study, a room lined with empty bookshelves and a massive, claw-footed desk. I dropped my bag and backpack, the thud jarring in the stillness. Unpacking was a futile gesture, but it was something to do. I pulled out a fresh shirt, a toothbrush, a dog-eared copy of a novel I'd never finished. As I placed the book on the desk, a faint scratching sound came from behind the wall, a delicate, rhythmic scrape. A mouse, I decided, trying to rationalize the sudden prickle on my neck. Old houses had mice. I moved to the nearest window, trying to pry it open for some fresh air. It was stuck fast, painted shut by decades of neglect. I leaned against the sill, pushing harder. The wood groaned. I jumped back, startled. It was a dried flower, or what remained of one, its petals brittle and black, harmless, just an old house shedding its skin. My heart, however, was beating a little faster than it should have been. The scratching sound started again, louder this time, not from the wall, but from directly beneath my feet. It was a rhythmic tap, 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 like a slow, deliberate drum. My breath hitched. That was no mouse. It was too heavy, too consistent. It sounded like something was being struck or perhaps dragging something in the foundations below. The floorboards under my feet vibrated faintly. I swallowed, my mouth suddenly dry. "Hello?" I tried again, my voice thin, reedy. The tapping stopped. I waited, straining my ears. Nothing. It must have been the house settling, the old pipes. Old houses made noises. I was just jumpy. The fire, the loss, it had made me jumpy. I needed to understand the source of the sound. I needed to know. The logical part of my architect's brain insisted on investigation, on understanding the structure. The other part, the part that remembered the smell of smoke and the heat, screamed for me to leave, but I couldn't. Not yet. I found the cellar door tucked away behind a pantry, a heavy wooden hatch set into the floor. It was secured with a rusty iron latch. My fingers fumbled with it, the cold metal biting into my skin. The latch squealed as it lifted. A gust of frigid, damp air rushed up, carrying with it a potent smell of mildew, earth, and something else. Something metallic, coppery, that made my stomach clench. I descended the creaking wooden steps, each one protesting my weight, into an absolute blackness. My phone's flashlight beam cut through the gloom, revealing a cramped, low-ceilinged space. Cobwebs brushed my face like phantom fingers. The flashlight beam swept across shelves of ancient, unlabeled jars, then over the rough stone walls, revealing a narrow passage leading deeper into the house's guts. I followed it, the sound of my own ragged breathing suddenly loud in my ears. The passage opened into a larger, cavernous space. This was it. The boiler room, no radio contact. A monstrous, rusting boiler dominated the center, its pipes snaking up the walls like metallic serpents. I tried to check my phone, but the screen remained stubbornly blank, showing no signal, complete isolation, and then I heard it again. The tap, tap, tap. It wasn't coming from the boiler, it was coming from inside the boiler. My hand flew to my mouth, stifling a gasp. The sound grew louder, more insistent, a frantic hammering now, echoing in the confined space. The entire room seemed to vibrate with it. I stumbled back, my feet catching on something unseen. The metallic, coppery smell was overwhelming now, thick in my throat. The hammering intensified, a frantic, desperate plea. Was it a plea or a warning? What in God's name was inside that boiler? The ancestral home loomed, a skeletal hand against the bruised twilight sky. My fingers tightened around the heavy ring of keys, the metal cold and unfamiliar. Each key felt ancient, burdened with the weight of generations I knew nothing about. The lawyer's words echoed, dry and legalistic, but the underlying current of obligation, of legacy, was what truly settled in my gut. Why me? Why this crumbling monument to a past I'd spent years trying to outrun? The house itself seemed to hold its breath, a vast, decaying lung inhaling the last vestiges of daylight. The front door groaned open, a sound like an old man sighing. A wave of stagnant air, thick with the scent of mildew, dust, and something indefinably sweet, washed over me. I stepped inside, my shoes scuffing on what felt like a century of accumulated grime. The foyer was a cavern, swallowing the faint light from outside. Dust motes danced in the sparse beams, illuminated briefly before vanishing into the gloom. My breath caught, not just from the smell, but from the sudden, oppressive silence that followed the door's reluctant closure. The city sounds, the distant rumble of traffic, the calls of evening birds all were muffled, lost behind the thick walls. It was as if the house itself had swallowed the world outside. I found a wall switch, a yellowed plastic rectangle, and flicked it. Nothing. I tried another, of course. This place hadn't been lived in for decades. Each step on the warped floorboard sent a tremor through the house, a low groan that seemed to answer my own unease. I told myself it was just an old house, neglected, settling. The air grew heavy, almost viscous, as I pushed open the door to what looked like a study. Here, the scent was different old paper, dried ink, and something sharp, like ozone after a storm. My flashlight beam danced across rows of leather-bound books, their spines cracked and faded, lining shelves that climbed to the high ceiling. A large, mahogany desk dominated the center of the room, covered in a thick blanket of dust. I ran my hand over it, leaving a clean streak in the gray film. Beneath the dust, I found it, a small, intricately carved wooden box. It wasn't locked. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, lay a single tarnished silver locket. It was heavy, cool to the touch. I opened it. On one side, a miniature portrait of a stern-faced man with eyes that seemed to follow me even in the dim light. But what truly froze me was the inscription on the inside of the locket's lid. So tiny I had to hold it close to the phone's light, to remember what was lost, to cherish what remains, to know what waits. The words felt less like a memento and more like a threat. What did it mean? It was just an old family heirloom, a morbid sentiment from a bygone era. People were different then. My rational mind wrestled with the unease, trying to categorize it, dismiss it. This was just the house playing tricks on me, its age and decay preying on my already fragile state. I needed to get the utilities on. A working light, a little warmth that would dispel these ridiculous notions. I remembered seeing a diagram of the house in the documents the lawyer had given me. The boiler room, no radio contact, was in the basement beneath the kitchen. A draft snaked around my ankles, sharp and biting. I found the kitchen, a relic of a bygone era, with a massive cast-iron stove and a porcelain sink stained brown with age. A narrow wooden door, almost hidden in a corner, led to the basement stairs. The stairs were steep, rickety, and plunged into absolute blackness. The flashlight beam struggled to penetrate the gloom. The air down here was thick with the smell of damp earth, rust, and something else, something metallic and faintly sweet like old blood. Each step creaked ominously, showering me with fine dust. I descended slowly, one hand braced against the clammy stone wall. I could hear my own ragged breathing, loud and desperate. At the bottom, the space opened into a low-ceilinged area dominated by a monstrous ancient boiler. Its iron shell was flaking paint, stained with rust, and it hummed with a low internal thrum that I hadn't heard from upstairs. It wasn't the sound of a working machine, but something deeper, more resonant, like a sleeping beast. The air was heavy, damp, and strangely still. I reached for my phone, intending to call the caretaker listed in the documents, but the screen displayed a stark no service message. No radio contact. A sudden sharp clang echoed from deeper within the boiler room, making me jump. It sounded like metal striking metal, then a soft, wet drip. My heart hammered against my ribs. Was I truly alone down here? The lawyer's words echoed, dry and legalistic, but the chill that seeped into my bones had nothing to do with the evening air. It was the house itself, a hunched silhouette against the bruised purple sky, that truly spoke to me. A skeletal hand indeed. My fingers, still clenched around the heavy ring of keys, were numb. Each key, cold and pitted, felt like it weighed a generation, a secret, a burden. I had come seeking solace, a clean slate, but this place promised only more weight. I pushed open the massive oak front door. The air inside was thick, stagnant, carrying the scent of damp earth, decaying wood, and something else, something metallic and faintly sweet, like old blood mixed with dust. My architect's eye, a trained reflex, immediately began its assessment. The grand foyer, despite its cobwebs and grime, hinted at former elegance. I noted the intricate crown molding, now chipped and flaking, the once gleaming parquet floor obscured by a film of grit. But beneath the superficial decay, I looked for structural integrity, for the bones of the building. My mind craved order, logic, something to grasp onto in this suffocating gloom. I walked through the ground floor, my footsteps echoing unnervingly in the vast, empty rooms. A draft, a settling foundation. My determination was a shield, deflecting the tendrils of unease that tried to coil around me. The high ceilings, the deep-set windows, the solid stone fireplace in the drawing room all spoke of a forgotten craftsmanship. But there were cracks, too. Hairline fissures in the plaster, a slight lean to one of the door frames that suggested a deeper problem. I pulled out my phone, not to call anyone, but to use its flashlight, sweeping its beam across the walls, examining the ceiling joists where the plaster had fallen away. The stairs groaned under my weight, each step a protest. I found bedrooms, a library, and what might have been a sitting room, all echoing the same story of neglect. Dust motes danced in the anemic light filtering through grimy windows. I checked the window frames for gaps, the floorboards for rot, the walls for evidence of leaks. My mind cataloged the data: potential water damage in the north wing, dry rot in the attic eaves, a sagging beam over the kitchen. These were problems I understood, problems I could solve. Real problems, but the house wasn't entirely forthcoming with its secrets. I found myself drawn to a narrow, unmarked door in a forgotten corner of the ground floor, tucked away behind what must have been the servants' pantry. It was a sturdy, unpainted slab of wood, unlike the ornate paneling of the main rooms, and it was locked with a heavy iron bolt. This felt different. This wasn't just neglect, this was deliberate concealment. My fingers fumbled with the ring of ancient keys. There were so many, some corroded beyond recognition. The door scraped open, revealing a stairwell descending into absolute blackness. It was the smell of old machinery, of rust, of something long dormant. This wasn't just another room, this felt like an artery, a vital, hidden organ of the house. I descended carefully, my phone's beam cutting a shaky path through the gloom. The stone steps were uneven, slick with condensation. It swallowed the sound of my own breathing, the scuff of my shoes on the stone. It felt like walking into a vacuum. At the bottom, the beam revealed a vast, cavernous space. This was it. The air was thick with the scent of iron and something else, something fetid and organic, like stagnant water mixed with forgotten dreams. Dominating the center of the room was a monstrous cast-iron behemoth, its pipes snaking across the ceiling like dead arteries. A boiler, ancient and rusted, its gauge frozen at 0. The walls were rough-hewn stone, sweating with moisture, and they seemed to absorb all light, all sound. This was the boiler room, no radio contact. I pulled out my phone, a sudden, irrational need to connect, to hear a familiar voice. No signal, not even a bar. My heart gave a lurch. I tried again, moving my hand, turning, hoping for a flicker. Nothing. The digital display stubbornly declared, no service. I tried to rationalize it: thick stone walls, deep underground, but the sudden, complete isolation was unnerving. It felt deliberate, I was cut off. My eyes scanned the room, trying to force my architectural mind to see only pipes, valves, structural supports. The silence was no longer empty, it was watchful. My breath hitched. What else was down here, breathing the same heavy air? My fingers, still clenched around the heavy ring of tarnished iron keys, felt numb. The lawyer's words, dry and legalistic, had been little more than a drone against the deeper chill that seeped into my bones, a cold that had nothing to do with the evening air. I stood there, a statue carved from apprehension and resolve, the gravel crunching under my shoes as the lawyer's car receded down the winding driveway, its taillights shrinking to pinpricks. The air grew heavier, thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. The house loomed, a monument to forgotten sorrows and something else, something watchful. A shiver traced its way up my spine, but I didn't turn back. I couldn't, not after everything. The fire, the ash, the screams that still echoed in my sleep. This house, this legacy, felt like a judgment or perhaps a twisted form of penance. I had to face it, whatever it was. The main door groaned open, a drawn-out sigh of protest, revealing a cavernous darkness within. My flashlight beam cut a path through the gloom, illuminating peeling wallpaper, shrouded furniture, and the ghostly shapes of forgotten lives. I moved through the empty rooms, a voyeur in a mausoleum, each space heavy with an unspoken history. The dining room with its massive, dust-sheeted table felt like it was still waiting for a feast that would never arrive. I found a narrow, winding staircase tucked away behind the pantry, its steps rough-hewn stone, worn smooth in the center by countless footsteps. The air grew cooler here, then abruptly warmer, a humid heat that prickled my skin. A low, rhythmic hum vibrated through the floorboards, a sound I hadn't noticed from above, masked by the house's sheer size. It was a mechanical pulse, steady and relentless. Down I went, the stone walls closing in until I reached a heavy wooden door braced with iron. I pushed it open with a grunt and stepped into the boiler room, no radio contact. The air hit me like a physical thing, thick, humid, smelling of rust, stagnant water, and a faint, acrid tang I couldn't place. The hum was deafening here, a low, guttural growl that vibrated through my teeth. Water dripped somewhere, a maddeningly irregular beat against the relentless hum. My phone, clutched in my hand, showed no signal, nothing, just dead air. The floor was slick in places, a thin film of something viscous underfoot. My eyes scanned the walls, searching for a control panel, a gauge, anything that might explain the house's persistent heat, even in its abandonment. That's when I saw them. Scratched into the rust-pitted surface of a massive iron support beam, hidden partially behind a cluster of thick pipes, were a series of marks. Not random graffiti, but deliberate, repetitive etchings. Lines, hundreds of them meticulously carved, almost like tally marks, but each one ending in a small, crude circle. And then below them, a single word scratched deep, almost obliterated by subsequent rust. Lost. My breath hitched, my flashlight beam lingered on the word, then moved back to the tally marks. They weren't just a count, they were a chronicle, a record of something. Of someone, each mark a day, a week. A moment of agony. I ran my fingers over the rough metal, feeling the indentations. This wasn't just a boiler room, it was a testament. As I absorbed the crude message, a new detail emerged. Wedged into a narrow gap between the beam and a smaller pipe, almost invisible, was a small wooden bird. Hand-carved, intricately detailed, but now faded and chipped, one wing broken. It was a child's toy left behind, forgotten, or perhaps deliberately hidden. Someone had endured profound suffering here. Someone had been trapped, counting the days, feeling utterly lost. The air in the boiler room seemed to thicken, pressing in on me. The rhythmic hum of the boiler shifted, becoming something else, something less mechanical, more like a low, mournful moan. I felt a sudden, visceral connection to the unknown hand that had carved those marks, to the child who had owned the broken bird. Their sorrow, their loss, their trapped despair, it resonated with my own. The raw, aching guilt I carried for my family, for the fire, for the home I had designed that had become their tomb. It wasn't just a similarity, it was a mirror. And then the horrifying realization struck me, clear as a bell in the suffocating heat of the boiler room. This house, it didn't just contain sorrow, it fed on it. The suffering of its previous inhabitants, their grief, their guilt, it was nourishment. And I, Raj, steeped in a guilt so profound it had become a part of me, was not just an air. I was a meal. It was a sound like dry leaves skittering across pavement or a forgotten sigh. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Was the house merely a vessel, or was something else here, something that had drawn me? Knowing what I carried? What exactly had consumed the previous inhabitants, and what did it intend for me? It was the house itself, a hunched silhouette against the bruised sky that truly held me, but no more. I wasn't going to be a prisoner to this oppressive silence, this creeping dread. I had to leave, now. My decision solidified into a hard knot in my gut, a counterforce to the icy tendrils that had been wrapping around me since my arrival. I wasn't staying another night. This wasn't solace, this was a trap. I strode back through the echoing hall, the soles of my shoes scraping against the worn wooden floorboards, each step a declaration of defiance. My small bag, packed with the few essentials I'd brought, lay on the hall table, a pathetic testament to my misplaced optimism. I snatched it up, the strap digging into my shoulder. It was my way out. I reached for the brass knob, my hand clammy. I twisted. Nothing. I tried again, putting more force into it, my grip tight. The knob remained stubbornly still, refusing to turn, refusing to give. A flicker of unease, hot and sharp, pricked at my resolve. It was old I reasoned, just stiff. I leaned into the door, pushing against it with my shoulder, imagining the fresh air, the open road beyond. The door didn't budge. It felt as solid as the foundation of the house itself. A bead of sweat traced a path down my temple. Panic, a small, insidious worm, began to writhe in my stomach. I remembered the back door, the one leading to the overgrown garden. Perhaps that would be easier. I moved quickly, my breath catching in my throat, the bag thumping against my hip. The back door, a lighter panel of wood with a single pane of grimy glass, seemed a more promising escape. I reached for its simple latch. The latch clicked, but the door remained shut. I pulled. It held fast. I pulled harder, grunting with effort, my muscles straining. The door frame seemed to be fused, swollen tight against the door itself. I pressed my ear to the wood, listening. No sound from outside, just the distant creak of the house settling, a sound that now seemed less like age and more like conscious breathing. My heart began to tap a frantic rhythm against my ribs. My mind raced, searching for an alternative. Windows, too high, too small, most were painted shut or boarded from the outside. The basement. There was an old service entrance down there. I remembered the estate agent mentioning it during the rushed walkthrough. It led directly outside, separate from the main house access. It was a long shot, but it was a shot. The cellar was a labyrinth of forgotten things, dusty crates, broken furniture draped in cobwebs, stacks of yellowed newspapers. The air grew thick, pressing in on me. I navigated through the gloom, my hand sweeping cobwebs from my face, my eyes scanning for the service door. I found it eventually tucked away behind a towering stack of firewood, a small, unadorned metal door rusted at the hinges. Hope, thin and fragile, flared within me. This was it. This had to be it. I wrestled with the stack of wood, tossing logs aside with desperate energy, the effort burning in my shoulders. Finally, the door was clear. It had a simple bolt lock, thick with rust. I fumbled for the keys in my pocket, the heavy iron ring clattering against the metal. The right key slid in stiffly, but it went. I turned it. A grating groan echoed through the cellar as the bolt retracted. I yanked on the handle. The door didn't open. Instead, a low, guttural thrum began to vibrate through the concrete floor beneath my feet. It wasn't just a sound, it was a physical sensation, a deep resonance that shook my teeth. The sound grew louder, a mechanical roar that filled the cavernous space. It was coming from the far end of the cellar, from behind a heavy, grimy curtain of canvas. The boiler room. No radio contact. I remembered the lawyer's hurried instructions about maintenance. The thrum intensified, becoming a deafening shudder that rattled the very bones of the house. My heart seized. The air was suddenly thick with the smell of ozone and something acrid like burnt metal. The roar was all-encompassing now, a monstrous engine awakening. I scrambled to my feet, my shins aching, my hands raw. Through the gaps in the canvas I saw it, a monstrous ancient boiler, its pipes glowing cherry red, hissing and spitting. It was working, or rather overworking, far beyond its capacity. Steam billowed out, scalding and opaque, filling the small enclosure behind the canvas. The thrumming wasn't just the boiler, it was the entire structure of the house, vibrating, groaning, resisting. It was alive, and it was angry. The metal service door I had just unlocked suddenly groaned again, a different sound this time. A sharp, metallic shriek. I whirled around, my breath catching. The heavy bolt, which I had just retracted, was sliding back into place, slow and deliberate, as if an unseen hand was pushing it. The rusted metal scraped against the door frame, sealing my last hope of escape with an awful finality. I stared, my eyes wide, unable to comprehend. It wasn't just the boiler. It was the house. It was doing this. A sudden, sharp crack echoed from above, followed by a cascade of crumbling plaster. The ceiling groaned. I was trapped. The house was a cage, and I, its newest occupant, was now fully ensnared. What did it want from me? It was the house itself, a hunched silhouette against the bruised sky that held the true cold. It promised nothing but more of the same, yet I had to know. I had to understand. A perverse determination, a knot of guilt and defiance, pushed me deeper into the house's decaying embrace. I'd spent days cataloging the surface rot, the peeling wallpaper, the dust-shrouded furniture, but the house always felt like it was holding something back, a secret buried beneath its visible decay. The old blueprints, brittle and yellowed, had been a puzzle. They showed a labyrinth of hidden passages, sealed-off rooms, and most intriguingly, a sub-level access point beneath the main kitchen pantry, leading to what was simply labeled, "Boiler Room, no radio contact." The designation itself had pricked at my unease. No radio contact? In a house this old, it was hardly surprising, but the explicit mention felt deliberate. I found the hidden latch behind a loose floorboard in the pantry, just as the plans indicated. It groaned open, revealing a narrow, stone-cut stairwell that spiraled down into absolute blackness. The air that rushed up was thick, heavy with the scent of damp earth, rust, and something else, something metallic like old blood or perhaps just the lingering aroma of stagnant water and corroding iron. My breath hitched. The descent was slow, each creaking step echoing unnaturally in the confined space. Then the stairs ended, opening into a vast, cavernous space. It was immense, far larger than I had anticipated. A monstrous, cast-iron boiler, rusted and silent, dominated the center, its network of pipes snaking across the ceiling like dead vines. The explicit warning on the blueprint had been accurate. I was truly cut off. My eyes scanned the perimeter. The floor was uneven flagstone, slick with condensation. Along one wall, I noticed a series of crude carvings, half obscured by grime and what looked like dried, reddish-brown stains. I knelt, wiping away the accumulated filth. They weren't just carvings. They were symbols, deeply etched into the stone, surrounding what looked like a stylized, weeping eye. Beneath it, a series of dates old and faded, stretching back centuries. My family's name, or a variation of it, appeared repeatedly next to these dates, often accompanied by another symbol, a broken chain. Each date marked an interval, a significant passage of time, and each time the weeping eye seemed to grow more detailed, more hungry. This wasn't just a boiler room. This was a shrine, or perhaps a record. Further along, tucked into a small, dry niche, I found it. A leather-bound journal, its pages brittle, its script in a language I recognized as an archaic form of my own tongue. It was a chronicle penned by various hands over generations. The first entry, dated centuries ago, spoke of a pact, a desperate bargain made by an ancestor to save the family from ruin. It spoke of a presence, a hunger that demanded sustenance. Grief, guilt. My hands trembled, the journal's weight suddenly immense. The entries detailed sacrifices, not of life, but of emotion. They had chosen to do this, to offer up their own suffering and the suffering of those they wronged, to keep it sated, to keep it dormant. But it was never truly dormant. It merely slept, waiting for the next feast. The journal detailed how it grew stronger with each generation, its demands becoming more explicit, its presence more palpable. My own family's tragedy. The fire, the unbearable guilt that had consumed me, it wasn't just a random act. It was a culmination. A final, grand offering. I flipped frantically through the pages, my breath catching in my throat. The last entry, dated just a few years before my parents' deaths, was written in a hand that was eerily familiar. My grandfather's. It spoke of the final phase of the chosen vessel, me. I wasn't just a victim. I was the architect of my own demise, unknowingly groomed. My life a carefully constructed tragedy designed to ripen me for this moment. My family hadn't just suffered. They had cultivated their suffering, harvesting it for something monstrous. The weeping eye symbol on the wall suddenly seemed to stare directly at me, its gaze no longer stylized, but alive, hungry. A low groan emanated from the boiler, a deep, metallic sound that vibrated through the stone floor and up into my teeth. It wasn't the sound of an old machine settling. It was a sound of awakening, of anticipation. My family's legacy wasn't wealth or renown. It was a curse, a bloodline steeped in complicity, bound to a horror that fed on the very essence of human despair. And I, Raj, was the main course. The faint light from my flashlight flickered, then dimmed. Was it the battery or something else? It was the house itself, a hunched silhouette against the bruised twilight that held the true cold, a profound emptiness that resonated with my own. But the time for simply feeling had passed. It fueled me. I wouldn't be a victim again, not here, not in this place that seemed intent on devouring the very last remnants of my peace. If this entity fed on grief, on guilt, then my presence here was a feast. I was a walking, breathing buffet, but what sustained it? What were its rules? Every evil had a weakness, a root. I was an architect. I understood structures, foundations, the way things were built and the way they could be dismantled. This house, this legacy, it was a structure too, built not just of brick and mortar, but of history, of family secrets, of something far older and more malignant than I'd ever conceived. The first step was to find the old blueprints, the original plans. I remembered a passing comment from the estate manager, a fleeting mention of an archive, a collection of my ancestors' early designs, tucked away somewhere in the lower levels. Dust motes danced in the slivers of moonlight piercing the grimy windows. The air was thick with the scent of aged paper and something else, something metallic and sharp like old blood or rust. I systematically moved through the heavy oak cabinets, my fingers brushing over brittle spines of books I'd never seen before, dense tomes on forgotten local history, obscure architectural styles, and even stranger, a few leather-bound volumes filled with what looked like arcane symbols and diagrams. My ancestors had been builders, yes, but what exactly had they built? Nothing in the study. My search led me deeper into the house, past the grand, sweeping staircase that seemed to twist into the gloom above, down a narrow, servant's passage I hadn't noticed before. The floorboards here groaned beneath my weight, a different kind of sound than the usual settling of an old house. These were sounds of protest, of resentment. The faint scent of mildew mixed with a distinct, acrid smell I couldn't quite place, like scorched earth or spent ash. Finally, I found it, a heavy, unmarked door tucked almost invisibly behind a sagging tapestry depicting a hunting scene. The iron latch was stiff, crusted with rust. It shrieked as I forced it open, the sound echoing down the stone steps that spiraled into absolute blackness. The descent was slow, each step a gamble against unseen hazards. The stone walls felt slick, coated in a fine, gritty dust. The temperature plummeted and my breath plumed visibly in the frigid air. The smell intensified down here, a potent cocktail of stagnant water, ancient metal, and something else, something subtly organic and unpleasant. At the bottom, the steps opened into a vast, cavernous space. This was it, the boiler room, no radio contact. The phone's light struggled to illuminate the sheer scale of the chamber. The air hummed with a low, almost infrasonic thrum, a vibration I felt more in my bones than heard with my ears. It was a dead space, forgotten, yet it felt acutely watched. I moved cautiously, my boots crunching on loose debris and what felt like fine, dry ash. My beam swept across shelves crammed with more forgotten things, tools caked in rust, empty kerosene cans, and then a stack of wooden crates, carefully labeled in an elegant, faded script. Architectural Studies' great-grandfather Alastair. My fingers trembled as I pried open the first crate. Inside, nestled amongst yellowed newspaper, were rolls of parchment brittle with age. I carefully unrolled one. It was a blueprint, intricate and precise, of this very house. My great-grandfather's hand was unmistakable, but as I scanned the familiar layout, I noticed something off. Beneath the elegant lines of the walls and rooms, faint, almost hidden by age and overlaid corrections, were other symbols, not structural annotations. These were geometric patterns, sigils meticulously drawn into the very foundation of the building. Circles within squares, interlocking triangles, lines that didn't correspond to any load-bearing wall or pipe system. They looked protective or perhaps binding. My gaze snapped to another detail, a small, almost imperceptible chamber, deep beneath the central hearth, labeled only with a single, unfamiliar glyph. And directly beneath it, a series of lines, almost like roots, extending into the earth itself. They radiated outwards, mirroring the layout of the house above, connecting to each room, each corner. It was as if the house wasn't just built on the ground, but into something or around something. A sudden, sharp, metallic clang echoed from the far end of the boiler room, loud enough to make me jump, my phone nearly slipping from my grasp. My breath hitched. I knew with a certainty that iced my veins that I wasn't alone. It was here. It had followed me. It was waiting, watching me uncover its secrets. My eyes returned to the blueprint, to the strange symbols, to the hidden chamber and the root-like lines. This wasn't just a house. It was a cage or a trap, but for whom? And how did it work? It was the house itself, a hunched silhouette against the bruised sky that held the true cold, a profound, ancient chill that promised to devour warmth. I knew with a certainty that tightened my chest that this house was far more than brick and mortar. It was a maw. The heavy iron ring felt like a shackle, each key a burden. They were relics, each one a testament to forgotten passages and sealed-off histories. The lawyer, a man whose tailored suit seemed too pristine for the dust-laden air, had gestured vaguely towards the cellar, muttering something about the old systems. He hadn't lingered. No one ever did. I felt a morbid pull towards the lowest depths, a place where the house's secrets would be most concentrated, a place where its pulse, if it had one, would beat strongest. My breath plumed in the stale air as I descended the narrow, winding stone stairs leading to the cellar. Each step groaned, a complaint from the ancient wood. The air grew heavier, thick with the scent of damp earth, rust, and something else of faint, cloying sweetness like decaying flowers battling with the metallic tang of old machinery. I pressed my palm against the rough stone. It was slick with condensation. I found the door, a massive slab of oak reinforced with iron bands at the very bottom of the stairs. It took 3 attempts to find the right key among the dozen on the ring. The lock shrieked, a sound like tortured metal as it finally yielded. I pushed the door open, bracing myself for whatever lay beyond. A vast, cavernous space, it hummed with a low, resonant thrum, a sound that vibrated through the floor and up into my teeth. Massive boilers, their iron skins flaking with rust, squatted like sleeping beasts. A maze of pipes, some sweating, some radiating immense heat, crisscrossed the ceiling, disappearing into the gloom. The smell here was potent, hot metal, stale water, and the faint, acrid scent of burnt oil. I pulled out my phone, a useless gesture but habit. No signal, just as I'd expected. The house devoured connection. I moved deeper into the room, my footsteps echoing unnaturally on the concrete floor. I could just make out shapes, hulking forms draped in cobwebs, forgotten tools lying like discarded bones. A sudden, sharp hiss from a nearby pipe made me jump, my heart racing. It was just steam, I told myself, just the ancient system groaning. Then I saw him. His clothes were stained and ragged, a thick quilted jacket that seemed too heavy for the humid air. He was a small man, his face a roadmap of deep lines, his eyes wide and startlingly blue in the dim light. A local caretaker I vaguely remembered hearing. He'd worked for my family for decades, maintaining the property until he'd simply. He didn't move, just watched me, his gaze unnervingly steady. They always do. The family, drawn back to the well. My resolve, which had felt so fragile upstairs, solidified. I would not be another victim. "What well are you talking about?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. He gave a dry, humorless cough. "The well of sorrow, the one you built, didn't you, with your designs, your clever lines on paper." His gaze intensified, boring into me. "It feeds on it, you know, the despair, the guilt he knew, or rather the house had shown him. What are I doing down here?" "Waiting," he said simply, then shifted, his bones creaking like the old house. "Always needs more. And it lets me watch, it lets me remember." His eyes, those unsettling blue eyes, were fixed on me again. "Like you remember the smoke, the screams, the heat." The words were a physical blow. He wasn't just talking about the house's general hunger, he was talking about my grief, my guilt. The entity wasn't just lurking, it was actively consuming the rawest, most agonizing parts of my past. It was a predator, and I was its chosen prey. "What do you mean it lets you remember?" I demanded, taking a step closer, my hand tightening on the heavy key ring. The caretaker's lips peeled back in a slow, unsettling smile that showed yellowed teeth. "It shows you the cracks, the flaws, the things you tried to hide, and when you break, it drinks." He paused, his gaze dropping to my clenched hand, then back to my eyes. "Your family. They learned that too. Generation after generation, this place. It doesn't just hold secrets, it makes them. It demands them." He pushed himself up from the bucket, moving with a jerky, unnatural stiffness. He was frail, but his eyes held an unnerving intensity. "You think you can fight it? You think you can deny it what it's owed?" He took a shuffling step towards me, then another. He was a vessel, a broken mirror reflecting my own torment. But what was he trying to do? Was he trying to break me, or was he a warning? He was closer now, his breath, foul and stale, washing over my face. His hand, gnarled and trembling, reached out, not to grab me, but to touch the front of my jacket, hovering just inches away, just like the old one. My entire body stiffened. "What old one?" But before he could answer, a loud, metallic clang echoed from deep within the pipes, a sound like a hammer striking iron, followed by a sudden, violent shudder that ran through the entire room. I heard the caretaker's ragged breath close beside me. What had he meant? Plunged into absolute blackness. The sudden vacuum of light was a physical blow, stealing my breath. Dust rained down, gritty and cold against my scalp, a fine powder that tasted of decay and old masonry. The metallic clang still vibrated in the bones of my feet, a raw, angry thrumming that felt less like an echo and more like a fresh wound. My hands shot out, scrabbling against the rough stone of the cellar wall, desperate for purchase, for anything solid in the suffocating void. My flashlight, a heavy-duty camping model I'd brought specifically for this god-forsaken house, was clutched in my right hand. Nothing. Dead. The air grew thick, heavy with the scent of damp earth and something else, something acrid and metallic, like old blood mixed with rust. No cliches, Raj, just breathe. I could feel the tremor in my legs, a deep, bone-rattling fear that threatened to buckle my knees. I closed my eyes, even though it made no difference, trying to recall the layout of the cellar, the rough distance to the stairs. Then a low groan emanated from the floorboards beneath me, a deep, resonant rumble that seemed to come from the very foundations of the house. It wasn't the house settling. It was something else, something alive and in pain, or perhaps something feeding. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers clumsy. Just a solitary red X where the bars should have been. No radio contact. I was truly alone. The groan intensified, morphing into a guttural wheeze, closer now, as if whatever made the sound was right beneath my feet. I shone the phone's weak light downwards, sweeping it frantically across the floor. The beam caught on a faint seam in the concrete, a hairline fracture that hadn't been there before, running from the base of the central support column towards the far wall. As I watched, a thin, black liquid, viscous and oily, began to seep from the crack, spreading slowly like an expanding stain on old parchment. It didn't smell like water. It smelled like the earth itself was bleeding. What was seeping up from below? The shudder returned, more violent this time, and the seam in the floor widened with a sickening crack. A section of the concrete, roughly square, tilted inward, revealing a gaping maw of absolute blackness beneath. A blast of heat, thick and suffocating, rose from the opening, carrying with it the reek of stale combustion and something else, something metallic and burnt like scorched hair or old meat. This wasn't just a cellar, it was a prelude. It wanted me to descend. It needed me to descend. My mind raced. This was it. The core, the place where it truly dwelled. My family's legacy, my own guilt, all of it converged here. I swallowed. The taste in my mouth like ash. I had to go down. I had to face it. Each rung was thick with a black, greasy residue. I gripped the cold metal, my grip tight, and began my descent. The air grew progressively hotter, a stifling, humid heat that made my lungs ache with every breath. I could hear the drip of condensation, echoing strangely, as if the drops were falling into a vast, empty chamber. And then a new sound, faint at first, then growing steadily louder. The rhythmic thump-thump-thump of heavy machinery, a deep resonant pulse that vibrated through the ladder and into my bones. Finally, my foot met solid ground, not dirt, but a floor of rough-hewn concrete. The phone light, now almost useless against the sheer scale of the space, revealed glimpses of enormous, cylindrical structures, their surfaces pitted and scarred with rust. Pipes, thick as tree trunks, crisscrossed the ceiling and walls, some leaking steam, others dripping that same viscous, black fluid I'd seen upstairs. The heat here was unbearable, a dry, scorching furnace that baked the air and made my skin crawl. The rhythmic thump was deafening now, a relentless heartbeat that echoed off the unseen walls. I was in the boiler room, no radio contact. The sheer size of the space was disorienting. The pipes weren't just pipes, they seemed to writhe, too, like enormous metallic serpents, their joints groaning and hissing with unseen pressure. The air here was thick with the smell of burning oil and something else, something profoundly unsettling, like the smell of a forgotten crypt, mingled with the metallic tang of old blood. It was a place of industry, yes, but an industry of decay, of slow, deliberate corrosion. My eyes strained, trying to pierce the gloom. But it wasn't just the boiler making the sound. They were indistinct, like fragments of half-forgotten dreams, but I recognized the cadence, the undertone of unbearable sadness. It was the entity, speaking in the voices of its victims, of my family, of my own buried guilt. I could feel the entity's presence stronger here than anywhere else in the house, a palpable weight in the air, a predatory hunger. It was like standing inside its very maw. I had to find its weakness, its source. But how do you fight something that feeds on your very soul in a place designed to amplify its power? A palpable, suffocating weight. My breath hitched, tasting of rust and something acrid like burnt oil. The greasy pipe was slick beneath my fingers, its coldness a stark contrast to the boiling air that pressed in from all sides. Each whisper, once a distant murmur, now hammered against my eardrums, distinct and venomous. Weak. Guilty. This wasn't just a place of machinery, it was the house's gullet, its churning stomach, digesting all the misery that seeped into its foundations. I pushed away from the pipe, forcing myself to stand upright, my determination a brittle shield against the onslaught. I wasn't going to cower anymore. This thing, whatever it was, had fed on me long enough. I was an architect. I understood structures, stresses, the flow of energy. This house was a machine, and the boiler room, with its network of pipes and roaring furnaces, was its grotesque heart. The heat intensified, making my skin prickle, my vision swim. I squinted through the shimmering air, trying to make sense of the chaos. Steam hissed from a corroded valve, painting a section of the wall in a transient, ghostly white. I looked at the massive coal-fired furnace, its iron more glowing a hellish orange. This wasn't just for heating water. This was the engine. I moved closer, my hand brushing against the rough, cinder-block wall, feeling the tremor of the house's malevolence. The air here was thicker, heavy with the scent of stagnant water and something metallic, almost like blood. My mind raced, trying to map the unseen currents, the paths of its influence. Then I saw it. Not a physical thing, but a distortion. It swirled, gathering density, pulling at the light. A silent vortex, sucking something unseen from the very core of the room. It was drawing power, feeding. My eyes scanned the pipes, the conduits. This house was designed to last, built strong. But every structure has a weakness, a point of entry or exit, a necessary vulnerability for its function. The boiler room was meant to contain immense pressure, to harness and distribute heat. What if its very function could be turned against the entity? I remembered the old blueprints, those faded scrolls I'd found in the study. The original architect, my ancestor, had designed this house with an unusual complexity, not just for comfort, but for something else. There were hidden channels, reinforced sections that made no sense for a typical dwelling. And the boiler room's design was particularly intricate, almost like a containment chamber. A sudden sharp clang echoed from deep within the furnace, followed by a surge of heat that blasted outwards, forcing me to shield my face. The distortion above the furnace pulsed, growing larger, blacker, sucking in the dim light of the room. I could feel its tendrils probing my mind, trying to find the fresh wellspring of my guilt, the raw grief of my loss. But something had shifted inside me. This wasn't just a ghost. This was an anchor, a parasitic force that had been woven into the very fabric of my family's legacy, into the house itself. My ancestor hadn't just built a house. He'd built a cage, perhaps, or a conduit that had gone terribly wrong. I looked at the network of valves and gauges, the massive pressure release lever on the side of the main boiler. It was old, rusted, but still functional. If the house was a body, the boiler room was its heart, and this lever, this was its defibrillator or its kill switch. My architect's mind connected the dots. The entity fed on grief, yes, but it manifested through the house's physical structure, drawing energy from its systems. What if I could overload it? Not with brute force, but with a deliberate structural shock. I moved, my steps firm despite the vibrating floor, towards the lever. The entity shrieked, a sound that wasn't heard but felt, tearing at the edges of my sanity. The air around the vortex became frigid, even as the boiler room itself remained a suffocating inferno. It was fighting back, trying to push me away, to drown me in despair. My own past mistakes, my family's screams from that burning night, surged forward, vivid and agonizing, but I pushed through it. This was my chance. It was stiff, protesting, crusted with decades of grime. I had to release the pressure, to disrupt the flow, to sever its connection. It wasn't about destroying the entity, but about destroying its anchor, its feeding ground. With a grunt, I pulled. The metal groaned, screeching in protest. The vortex above the furnace pulsed violently, contracting and expanding like a dying breath. Was I strong enough to break free from its grasp? The whispers didn't just stop. They shattered. A sound like glass breaking inside my skull, sharp and sudden, followed by an impossible silence. The boiling air, moments ago a physical presence pressing against my skin, vanished. The phrase itself felt like a cage, a final, inescapable truth. My chest heaved, pulling in air that tasted clean, almost too clean after the rust and acrid smoke. My eyes, stinging from the heat and the strain, blinked rapidly, trying to make sense of the gloom. The pipes, once humming with unseen pressure, were now silent, weeping. Not water, but a thick, viscous black ooze that slowly dripped onto the floor, pooling in iridescent puddles. The air, despite its new coolness, carried a faint, sickly sweet stench, like overripe fruit left to rot in a damp cellar. It clung to the back of my throat, a physical reminder of what had just transpired. My gaze traveled upwards, following the serpentine network of pipes. They were not merely weeping. They were bleeding. Gaskets had burst, spewing tendrils of the black goo across the grimy concrete. Pressure gauges, once vibrant with their red and black needles, were now shattered, their glass faces webbed with irreparable damage, the needles bent into grotesque angles. The valves, some half open, some jammed shut, seemed to sag, defeated. The walls, once just stained concrete, now showed deep, jagged fissures, as if the very structure of the house had convulsed in agony. The boiler itself, a behemoth of rusted iron, shuddered. A low, guttural groan emanated from its depths, a sound of dying machinery or perhaps something else entirely. It was a sound of profound exhaustion, of something that had been pushed beyond its limits and was now collapsing in on itself. My legs felt like lead. Each step was an effort, my muscles screaming with phantom pains from the recent struggle. I leaned against a wall, the rough concrete cool against my flushed cheek. My reflection in one of the oily puddles was a stranger's face, gaunt, eyes wide with a manic intensity, hair matted with sweat and grime. I didn't recognize the man staring back. He was broken, yes, but also something else, harder, sharper. The guilt that had been a suffocating blanket for so long now felt like a raw, exposed nerve, still there but no longer paralyzing. It was a wound, not a cage. The silence was profound, broken only by the persistent drip of the black ooze. It was then I saw it. Not on the pipes, not on the walls, but on the floor near where I'd stood. Etched into the concrete as if burned by an impossible heat was a pattern. A complex, swirling design I recognized from the old blueprints, the one I'd dismissed as an archaic architectural flourish. But here it was not merely a design. It was a scar, a brand, still faintly smoking, like a wound that refused to heal. And within its intricate lines, I could almost discern a faint, shimmering residue, like dried tears or evaporated smoke. It was the mark of the entity, not just gone, but ripped from the fabric of the house, leaving a permanent wound. This wasn't just a house. It was a living thing, and I had just performed a brutal surgery on it. A wave of nausea washed over me. The smell of decay was intensifying, a cloying sweetness that made my stomach churn. I stumbled towards the door, my hand scraping against the rough wood, splinters digging into my palm. I barely felt it. My focus was on escaping the immediate aftermath, on seeing if the damage was contained to this hellish room. It felt like a physical weight pressing in. My fingers traced the familiar contours of the hallway, but it was different. The very texture of the house felt altered. The wood floorboards groaned under my weight, a deeper, more mournful sound than before. Each step felt like a trespass. I reached the main hall, the faint moonlight filtering through the dusty windows, painting the scene in spectral shades of gray. My breath caught. The grand staircase, once a symbol of my family's pride, now sagged precariously in the middle, a gaping maw of splintered wood and exposed lath. Plaster dust lay thick on every surface, obscuring the intricate carvings, muting the once vibrant wallpaper. Cracks, like lightning bolts, raced up the walls, crisscrossing the portraits of forgotten ancestors, shattering their painted smiles. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and something indefinable, something ancient and disturbed. It was as if the house had shed a skin, or perhaps endured a violent exorcism. Every surface bore witness to the struggle. Chandeliers hung at odd angles, their crystal pendants dulled and coated in a fine layer of grime. The heavy oak doors to the drawing room were ajar, revealing a similar scene of desolation within. Furniture was overturned, cushions ripped, as if a hurricane had passed through, but a silent one, a storm of pure, concentrated malice. The house no longer felt like a place of lingering sorrow, but a place of raw, open wounds. I had torn the thing out, I knew that. I had felt it recoil, a visceral wrenching sensation that had nearly torn me apart too. The house, my ancestral home, the place I had sought refuge, was now, a husk, a mausoleum of shattered memories and structural failure. My fingers brushed against a broken vase on a side table, the shards cool and sharp. It wasn't just physical damage. The very spirit of the house felt broken. Had I truly saved it or merely condemned it to a different kind of death? What had I unleashed? What remained? What had I become? The impossible silence. It pressed in, not with the weight of the earlier presence, but with a brittle, empty vastness that made my ears ache. My teeth chattered, a rhythm I couldn't control, loud in the profound quiet of the boiler room, no radio contact. A high-pitched whine, like static feedback, seemed to originate from inside my own skull, a phantom echo of the shattered whispers. I tasted iron, not blood, but something metallic and bitter, coating my tongue, drying my throat. I was on my knees, though I didn't remember the exact moment of collapsing. My ribs felt bruised. Had it truly worked? Had the desperate act of acknowledging my own guilt, of speaking aloud the unspeakable truths of my family's hidden cruelties, truly driven it back? Or had I simply exhausted myself, leaving an empty, more vulnerable vessel for it to return to? I pushed myself up slowly, muscles screaming in protest, each joint a grinding complaint. My head throbbed, a dull, persistent hammer behind my eyes. I looked around the boiler room. No radio contact. The massive, dormant furnace, a rusted leviathan, hulked in the corner, a monument to forgotten warmth. Pipes like skeletal fingers snaked across the grimy ceiling, dripping intermittently, the faint, irregular ping asterisk of water hitting metal amplifying the unnerving quiet. But absence wasn't proof of departure. It could simply be waiting, a patient predator in a new kind of ambush, its hunger merely sated for a time. The air still carried a faint, acrid scent, like burnt sugar and old damp earth. My breath hitched, a shallow gasp. I could still feel the echoes of its hunger, a faint, residual ache in the air, a memory of the way it had gorged on my grief, on the self-loathing that had become my constant, suffocating companion. It was the accumulated despair, the buried secrets, the silent suffering of generations within these very walls. And I, with my own immense burden, had unknowingly become the latest, most potent offering. The fire that took my family, my design, my negligence, my crushing guilt. It had been a beacon, a veritable feast for the entity. Not a cure, not an erasure of the pain, but a realignment. It felt like a scar, a deeply embedded part of me, yes, but not the entirety of me. I could still breathe. My gaze fell on the heavy iron door of the boiler room, no radio contact. A house steeped in ancestral sorrow, yet also a house I had, in a strange, terrifying, almost intimate way, come to understand. What was I supposed to do with it now? Walk away? Let it stand, a monument to its own relentless hunger, a trap for the next generation? Or burn it to the ground, a final destructive echo of my past, an act of desperate, annihilating escape? The thought of fire made my stomach clench, a wave of nausea. No, not fire. Never again. That was its language, not mine. A tremor ran through me, not of fear, but of an unshakable resolve. The house was not just a container for the entity. It was a testament to the lives lived within it, the good and the unspeakably bad. It was my inheritance, a physical manifestation of my family's complex, troubling legacy. I couldn't simply abandon it, not after everything I had faced within its suffocating embrace. That would be another, more insidious form of surrender. I had to break the cycle. I had to starve it, not with neglect or ignorance, but with deliberate, relentless purpose. The entity fed on despair, on hidden sorrow, on unspoken shame. What if I filled these echoing halls with something else entirely? Light, life, honesty. It sounded utterly absurd, a single man against an ancient, malevolent force, but the alternative was a lifetime of running, a lifetime of letting the past dictate my entire future. A slow, inevitable surrender. I saw the blueprints in my mind, not the original, flawed designs I had once drafted, but entirely new ones. Plans for renovation, yes, but more than that. Plans for transformation. Introduce natural light, not just through larger windows, but through skylights, through deliberate architectural choices that invited the sun to penetrate the deepest recesses. I would convert the heavy, suffocating rooms into something airy, something that truly breathed. I would speak it. I would bring it all into the unforgiving light. It wouldn't be easy. The financial burden alone would be immense, a crushing weight on its own. It wasn't about redemption, not entirely. It was about responsibility. It was about choosing to build not just structures of stone and timber, but a new way of living, a new way of remembering, a way that honored the past without being enslaved by it. I rose to my feet, my legs still unsteady, but my resolve firm, a new spine of steel. I still didn't know if the entity was truly gone, if it was merely dormant, biding its time, or if it would resurface, stronger, angrier, its hunger reignited. But I knew this with a certainty that settled deep in my core. I wouldn't be feeding it anymore. I would be fighting it, one brick, one beam, one truthful breath at a time. The house, my inheritance, would no longer be a tomb. It would be a crucible, yes, but one of my own making. But what would ultimately rise from the ashes of my past, from the very bones,